I want to start by saying that I'm not an expert in this subject. Some of you will know my background is in news and news media, and so I know a bit about how to report real news and how to tell real news from fake news. But I'm not an expert in fighting fake news and in talking with people in your community about fake news. Um, but what I've done and what I'm going to share with you today is the result of a bit of research I've done. But actually, it's mainly from speaking with cluster members and hearing stories from other cluster members about how they've spread, how they fought fake news locally, and how they've gone about doing that. So I'm not an expert in this subject, but my experience is that when we as cluster members share our stories and experiences with one another, then we develop this kind of group expertise. And obviously, we all have COVID on our minds today, and we can all think. I'm sure we can all think of examples of fake news around COVID. I remember when the pandemic first began, there was fake news circulating amongst my family and friends that was to do with ice cream and how ice cream could help stop the spread of COVID if you ate ice cream, which is obviously a bit ridiculous, but this is what people believed. So I'm sure we can all think of our own examples, and some of these examples are really quite dangerous. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is not so much how to spot fake news, but I'm going to talk about how it can spread in a community or online and how quickly it can spread. I'm going to look a bit at who is best placed to fight it, what kinds of people in a community are best equipped to help change people's beliefs or behaviors about fake news. I'm going to look at how we can fight it. So how we go about having conversations with people locally, and the different things we can do in order to challenge fake news in our communities. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end for perhaps your questions and stories. Like I say, to me, this is how we learn about how best to fight fake news, is from sharing these stories with one another. And what I'd encourage you to do, if you have questions or stories or comments, then put them in the chat function at the bottom of your at the bottom of the screen. Just type them in. Then at the end, Tom or I can read them out and we can start to respond to them. But yeah, this is what we're going to go through, and yeah, there'll be 3 case studies, all of which are from cluster members, either past or present cluster members. So let's get started. I just quickly want to look at how it spreads. And I want to start by showing you just how incredibly easy it is to create fake news. And I'm going to show you this image here. Now, this is a picture of Donald Trump and a quote that says, "I love Aruka Network. It's my favorite network." Now, hopefully you realize Donald Trump did not say these words, but I created this in about 2 minutes using a tool on my computer. And I put in a BBC News logo at the top to make it look real. And then I've suggested that Donald Trump said this on the 9th of June, 2020. Now, this was really easy to create, and I could now put this on all of our WhatsApp groups. We have about 10 Aruka cluster WhatsApp groups, and share it with hundreds of people. And if they then share it with others, then, you know, it can spread that Donald Trump said this about our network. And I think everyone here is probably on WhatsApp. And just to give you an indication of how quickly things can spread, you'll often see now on WhatsApp these words here, forwarded many times. And, you know, good things can be forwarded many times, and fake news can be forwarded many times as well. but it just gives you an indication of how quickly things can spread. It's just one touch of a button, and if you share it with a group of 10 people and they share it with 10 others and they share it with 10 others, then quickly it can travel around the world. And I'm just going to read this quote to you. This is from some research I found online about fake news and how it spreads. And it said, when people don't have the information or time to tell if something is true, they tend to look at what those around them think. When people don't have the information or time to tell if something is true, they tend to look at what those around them think. And we see this happen in WhatsApp groups and online, but we also can see it happen within our communities. And I want to show you this, a model really for how fake news can spread. And I'm going to show you 4 scenarios of how fake news can spread and how we can challenge it. So I want you to imagine that all of these circles are people in your community, people in your neighborhood. And I want you to imagine that this black circle is you. And we're going to look at 4 scenarios of how fake news can spread through this group of people. So the first scenario is if you, as an individual, you share the fake news that you hear with others. So you see this red circle here. Imagine that's somebody who brings a bit of fake news to your community. And if they pass it on to their friends and they pass it on to theirs and so on, and it comes to you and you pass it on as well, then quickly it will just infect the entire community, unimpeded. And now scenario 2, I want you to imagine that if you don't share the fake news, you just ignore it. And again, the fake news comes into the community here, is passed on, it gets to you, you don't pass it on, but other people do. And so people around you might not hear it, but then eventually it can come back to them and again infect an entire community. So the third scenario, if you decide you're going to challenge the fake news, you're going to say to people who share it, I don't think this is right. I think this true news is right instead. And so again, it'll come into the community, it'll spread, it'll get to you, you'll challenge it. And some people around you that are represented as yellow, they're undecided, they don't know what to believe. But the people in green, they listen to you and they realize that this fake news is wrong. We need to ignore it, or we need to challenge it. So there you create a bit of resilience to the fake news by challenging it and by saying this is wrong. But let's look at a 4th scenario. And this one, we're going to say, what if you and others in your community decide to challenge the fake news? And so here, I've got some black circles that represent you and the people in your community who are also challenging the fake news. And this time, it can come into the community, but it just won't infect the community to the same degree. And okay, this is quite a simple model. You know, this is quite crude, but to me, it makes the point that we have an obligation to challenge fake news. We cannot just ignore it and expect it to go away. So to me, this begs 3 questions. The first one is, how do we spot fake news? How do we know what's true and what's fake? The second one is, who in our community is best placed to fight the fake news and to challenge people? And then the third one, how do we go about challenging it? And this first point of how do we spot fake news, I want to say it's not really the purpose of today, but I do want to show you a quick resource on the Aruka website that can help you with this. So I'm just going to quickly do a little detour and show you. If you go to the Aruka website and if you go to this training tab here, then free tools, it'll open this page, and there's all sorts of free, simple resources that you can use in your work to do with communications and leadership and healthcare. And then if you scroll down, there's an article here called How to Spot Fake News. And if you click on that, you get 7 ways to spot fake news. And it's really just a list of questions you can ask yourself, simple questions to try and tell if something is true or not. And I'll just quickly draw your attention to the very last one here. If in doubt, ask an expert. And that could be someone in your network. You might have medical experts in your network, or it could be somebody further afield. It might be TED, for example, in Aruka, or somebody like that. So it could be someone in your cluster. It could be someone elsewhere. But I'll return to my presentation now. And so in terms of looking at how it spreads, just 4 things I want to draw your attention to: that it spreads incredibly quickly and easily, that it affects all of us, even if we don't pass it on, even if we challenge it sometimes, it affects us all. And that fake news shouldn't be shared, but more important than that, it must be challenged. We have an obligation to challenge fake news. So, who's in a best position to fight it? And I mean, there's a simple answer to this, and really it's everyone, it's all of us. And I just want to share this quote. This is a lady called Catherine of Siena, who was a Christian writer and thinker about 500 years ago, I think in Spain. But I like this quote of hers: "Preach the truth as if you had a million voices. It is silence that kills the world." And she was talking about the gospel, but to me it applies to all kinds of truth. It's silence that kills the world. So we all have an obligation to challenge fake news and to preach truth. But from the stories I've heard from cluster members and from research, is that some people are listened to in a community more than others. And we're going to look a bit about what kind of people those are. Now, this is Kelsang, who is on this call. So Kelsang, I hope you don't mind me sharing a bit of your story, because we spoke quite recently, and Kelsang is a health worker in Uttarakhand in northern India, and she works in rural communities, training people in basic healthcare and things like this. And we spoke recently, Kelsang and I, and there are lots of interesting things she told me, but one thing she told me is that when she first started doing her job 10 or 11 years ago, she would knock on doors and people wouldn't open them, or they wouldn't listen, or they didn't want to know what she had to say and the training she had for people. And then over the course of 10 or 11 years, she built up a relationship with people locally, and people came to trust her. And now people do open doors to her, and she's had great success in the work that she's done. And she told me how much she loves the work she does, and how she has a great relationship with these people in the rural communities that she works in. And so I'm going to share with you, because I asked Kelsang to tell me if she'd heard people spreading fake news about COVID in her community. And I'm going to play you a short clip of what she told me. So here we go. Here's Kelsang.
And then they were spreading like anything. My goodness, it was strange for me that how people, they are, lack of knowledge, only this happens. So I think I took 1 or 2 classes of group classes, and but then they understood what it really meant. Even the one of the leader, I took them also. So now she knows everything, and she tells others also.
Mm. So the people who were believing the fake news, you felt that they listened to you when you challenged them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, if they have any problem, they call me.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm ready for 24/7.
You need to get some sleep as well sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, I sleep, but when they need help, it's my spirit, wakes me up. Go help. No need to lie down.
And I don't know what you take from that, but there's a few things I take from that, and one of them is that it isn't enough to have expertise about healthcare, about COVID, about the vaccine. As Kalsang was saying 10 years ago, when she had good knowledge, people wouldn't listen to her in the same way, but it's through building up a relationship with people locally that they came to trust her and know her. And Kalsang, I love that line that you said, your spirit wakes you up. And to me, you talked a bit about your faith, your Christian faith to me as well, and how that was a motivating factor in how you love your neighbor, really. So yeah, there's one example of how, yeah, the medical knowledge is important, but actually having the good local relationships and the motivating factor of your faith can open doors and encourage people to listen to messages that they might not otherwise want to hear. So I'll just share with you one other case study. So this is a picture from Sierra Leone, and some of you will know in 2014 there was a huge outbreak of Ebola in Sierra Leone, and Ebola really is a terrifying disease. I think the mortality rate of COVID is about 2% or something like that, whereas Ebola is more like 50%. It's a really, really deadly disease, and similarly to COVID, it's transmitted when you're in close proximity to other people, and it's particularly dangerous to touch a dead body. Or to be close to people who are infected. But there was a big problem in Sierra Leone of funerals. So Sierra Leone is 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. And the Muslims have a tradition of, they need to bury their dead within 24 hours of them dying. And this involves touching dead bodies. And this was causing a lot of people to get infected. And there were lots of NGOs and government messages with big budgets trying to get people to change the practice of how they buried their dead so that they weren't touching dead bodies and people weren't getting infected. And a lot of these big government and NGO projects, they failed. But then a group of people within some NGOs realized that if they work with the faith leaders in their communities, so the Muslim leaders and the Christian leaders, and encourage them to preach from their pulpit, from the mosque, health messages about healthy practices and burying their dead in a safe way and not coming into close contact with each other, then they thought maybe this will encourage people to change their practices. And I'm going to play you a short clip now. This is a former member of our network in Sierra Leone, and he's going to talk a bit about how this came about and the impact it began to have when NGOs began to work with faith leaders. So let me just play this video for you. Okay, here we go. This is Adbane.
People were still in the habit of burying their dead. And with Ebola, you should not touch a dead person. But because it was a tradition in Sierra Leone, when somebody died, we need, like the Muslims, they need to make sure they bathe you within 24 hours. They need to take you to the grave. So people were practicing this, even when they were saying it on radio, they were still practicing it, and they kept on spreading the disease. I remember in Makeni, there was a particular community, there was somebody that died, and they washed the dead body and they pray over it. All of them, were infected. They went to their homes and they got them infected through vomiting and all that. The whole village suffered, and we had lots of children who were left without parents. So we contacted them, we trained them, and we encouraged them to be using verses in the Bible, in the Quran, to go to their Friday sermons and preach and talk about this. So we encourage them to find verses that talks about prevention in both the Quran and in the Bible. They also we encourage them to discourage congregational prayers. You know, in the Muslims, they will stand like this, shoulder to shoulder, to pray. So we discourage that. We told them to be having distance of one person's space and the next person. And they followed that, and we noticed the reduction started slowly.
Yeah, so I think there's lots more we could learn from the example of Ebola, but that case. So Adbain mentioned how the reduction started slowly, but the reductions from there continued, and it ultimately brought about an end to the outbreak of Ebola. And a lot of people see it as the turning point when the NGOs began to recognize that the faith leaders were the people in the community, were the people that were listened to and most respected in a community. And so it makes me think for COVID, you know, if we're able to identify the people with the authority, that, you know, the people that are listened to in a community, and working with them to share true news and to challenge fake news, then, you know, that's perhaps where some things will begin to change. So just to conclude this section, from what I have learned so far, the people best able to fight fake news are those that are respected locally, whether they be faith leaders or people like Kelsang who've built up a relationship. They're people who love their neighbors. The examples we've seen here are people who are motivated by this love. Yeah, perhaps a love of God and a love of their neighbors as well. And they're people with knowledge about the virus. So let's move on now just to think about how we can fight it. So we've learned how quickly it spreads. We've looked at what kind of people are best able to fight it. Now let's look at how they can go about fighting it. And some of you will be familiar with this image. I often think about this fable of the blind man and an elephant. And if you think of an elephant, it's got all these different parts, hasn't it? And you've got here somebody who's just feeling the tusk, and they think, oh, it's a spear. This person down here is feeling the trunk, thinks it's a snake. This person with the leg thinks it's a tree, and so on. And they've all got some kind of a grip on what's true. But actually, if these people aren't in a relationship with one another, if they're not listening to one another, if they're not sharing what they're experiencing, and if people aren't, you know, building those relationships, then they remain in a place of ignorance. And I think this is true for COVID as well. If we're listening to the people that are believing the fake news, and if they're listening to us, and if we have a healthy relationship with one another, then together we're more able to discern what is true. And I'm going to play you an example. So this is an organization that help other organizations tell fake news from real news. And it's a lady from this organization who's going to share two different ways we might challenge people who believe fake news. She's going to show a way that doesn't work and a way that does. And the example she's going to give is, I think it's somebody called Uncle Bob. So it's a scenario where imagine you're challenging your Uncle Bob who's been sharing this fake news. So let me show you this video. It's about 2 minutes long.
Right now, I'm having a lot of friends contacting me saying, Claire, I need your advice. I'm in a family WhatsApp group and people keep sharing misleading content. I don't know what to do. It's really important that we all work with each other to ensure that we're not sharing false content. It's really tempting to just press mute so you don't have to see your friends or family posting problematic content. But right now, unfortunately, we can't do that. We've actually got to talk to one another about this. And so here's some guidance. Hey Bob, I saw what you posted on Facebook. I just need to let you know that it's wrong. Anyway, here's an article that shows that it's wrong. So anyway, if you could delete it, that would be great. Thanks. In that scenario, Bob has just been made to feel bad about himself. You've kind of shamed him, even though you didn't mean to. But Bob has two choices. He either says, yeah, you're right, I was wrong, I'll delete it. Thanks for letting me know. But actually, the psychological literature says we are more likely to double down on our beliefs when somebody tells us that we're wrong, if it's done in the wrong way. So, a better way to go about this is to actually kind of say to Bob that you're all in this together. Hey Bob, I saw that you posted something on Facebook and it's really interesting because I'm seeing a lot of similar posts right now. But I'm worried that people are targeting our community right now. I mean, we're all seeing these messages, but I I worry that people are doing this because they're trying to scare us right now, or I'm really worried that people are doing this because they're trying to make money off the back of a pandemic, and I just don't think that's good. Using language that's empathetic, using language that's about how do we get through this together is a much more effective way of affecting friends and family who are right now sharing problematic content.
Now, she used the word empathy there and showing empathy. And it's funny. I read quite a lot of resources now of how we can best go about challenging people who believe fake news, and this word empathy comes up again and again. What seems to be the case is that it's not enough just to tell people what they believe is wrong and to point them towards what is right. Actually, we need to be showing them empathy. And empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. And I think what seems to be the case is that although the news that these people might believe might be fake, the feelings and the reasons that they believe it are true. You know, that these feelings might be ones of fear or confusion or vulnerability, and actually we need to share in those feelings and understand those feelings in another person. And here's an example I found online. So this is a man in America who he believed in a conspiracy theory. So it's a form of fake news in America, and it I won't go into what it is because it's very detailed, and it would derail this presentation. But for a long time, he was convinced by this fake news to do with American politics and things like this, and it had a really bad impact on his life. And ultimately, he came to realize that it was fake and that he'd been misled. And then he was interviewed in a newspaper about it. And he said this line here. He said, "If I didn't have family that loved me, I probably would have committed suicide. It was really a terrible feeling to know that you are this stupid and this wrong." So, I mean, to me, this underscores this importance of having empathy and showing love towards people who are believing things that are perhaps stupid and certainly wrong. Yeah, and I'm just going to share one last case study with you. So here he's talking about family, and this case study from Bihar in India, which I heard last year from a member of our network, is, I think it's a really interesting case study, and it, in some ways, it's not what I would have expected when we think about the ability of the authority figures and the leaders in a community, and the people we look up to as the people we listen to. Actually, this is a case study of children actually being the ones that are fighting the fake news and doing it with a real impact. So when the pandemic began last year in India, there was a national lockdown, and the organization World Vision decided it really wanted to continue its it ran these youth clubs in villages in Bihar, and so they continued their youth clubs by training young people in how to respond to COVID. They would share videos with them online that they could watch and learn. And they then had a picture drawing competition where children would draw health messages about COVID and share them in a WhatsApp group. And the children also went around the neighborhood sharing these messages, as you can see in this picture. And they even painted murals on the side of buildings about, you know, washing your hands, wearing a mask, keeping a distance from people, and all these things. And what World Vision also realized is that as these children grew in confidence and learned more, they would actually start to challenge fake news in their families and amongst their neighbors. And people began to wear masks, and people began to keep their distance, and people began to understand the virus and behave appropriately as a result of these children who became real community ambassadors, really, but for sharing health messages. And I recently spoke with a man called Deepak, who's from World Vision in Bihar. And I asked him just what he had learnt from this project. And now I'm just going to play you a short video of what he told me. So let me just get this working. Here we are.
Very often, actually, people, they neglect children. So very often they don't allow children to speak. They don't give space children to come up and give some ideas. But this project, you know, we have learned like how children also can be very much instrumental, and how children also, they can be the, you know, agents of transformation in their particular community. You know, so we should not neglect any child, because every child has some of the gifts. Okay, and because, you know, children, once you involve them in any kind of work, we will have enough opportunities to learn from the children as well. It's not about teaching them only, but we are also learning a lot of things from the children. If we need some kind of change in the community, then we must include children. We should take their ideas, we should take their suggestions, and we should very much involve children in the process of development, so that, you know, development and this transformation will happen in the lives of you know, children themselves, and in the lives of community people and communities. So involving children is very important and very vital for me.
So I don't know if you picked that up okay, but if we need any kind of change in our community, we must involve children. I think is a really nice line. Okay. So, I mean, that's really where I've got to in terms of my research and listening to people such as yourselves. So just in conclusion, what I've learned in terms of how we fight it as individuals, we should ask people when we hear somebody sharing fake news, we should ask people where they heard it, and we should remind them that sharing fake news has consequences. Ted sent me something recently, studies that show the number of people that have died as a result of sharing fake news about COVID. And, you know, it has the worst consequences. So we should ask them where they heard it. We should remind them it has consequences, but we should also be showing them empathy, and we should be patient. Yeah, Sushma, I spoke to you recently, and I asked you a bit about whether you'd encountered fake news in your work at all. And I remember you said you had, and you said you talked a bit about patience and the importance of recognizing that there's people sometimes might not be ready to change their mind, and we need to sometimes be patient and build that relationship and wait for that change to happen. And finally, just how we can fight it as a cluster or as a group, as an organization, whatever work you're involved in. Obviously, it's by staying informed. Sushma, I'll give you an opportunity in a moment, because I know you are involved in a course that some people can participate in that's about being a good community volunteer, really, around COVID. There's also a recent blog on the Aruka website from TED with some tips for how we can respond to COVID in our communities at the moment. So staying informed, identifying the respected leaders in a community, and as we've shown there, very often it can be cluster members. You guys are all looked up to in different ways, or it can be the faith leaders. But who in the community do people listen to? And one recommendation people are making at the moment is if you get a vaccine, get a picture, get a video of you receiving it, and share it locally and show that you're confident in the vaccine. And you can fight it as a cluster by working with these leaders. If they're not currently sharing information, helpful health messages about the virus, maybe, as with that story in Sierra Leone, maybe you can work with faith leaders and help equip them with the knowledge and the ideas to share the true news and to challenge the fake. And finally, it's by building local relationships, as I showed with that image of the elephant. It's only by building these relationships that we get through these things together.